How do we stop forgetting what God has done in our lives? And how can we build remembrance so that the blessings that we have actually turn into long-term memory rather than forgetfulness? And in Joshua chapter 4, we're going to unpack the memorial stones from the Jordan, and how God commands Israel to remember, and how testimony becomes a weapon against spiritual forgetfulness. And I'll give you one immediate action to help you build a memory that outlasts the moment in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. So Joshua chapter 4 is going to follow the Jordan crossing. So God commands Israel to take 12 stones from the riverbed and set them up as a memorial so that future generations can ask, what do these stones mean? And Joshua also sets up stones in the Jordan itself. The chapter is going to end by telling us that the crossing happened so that everyone would know the Lord is mighty, and so Joshua would be exalted in the people's eyes. And the chapter turns miracle into memory. So let's read the first 7 verses. The focus here is going to be on the 12 stones from Jordan, or from the Jordan River, as a memorial. And why does God want a physical reminder after a miracle? Verse 1. When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, select 12 men from the people, 1 from each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood. Carry them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight. Then Joshua summoned the 12 men whom he had appointed from the Israelites, 1 from each tribe. Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever. Biblical unlock number 1. Why does God tell them to take the stones from the river? And the reason is because the memory needs something attached to it. Miracles can be forgotten, but a memorial keeps the event in the life of the people. And what do the stones teach Israel? It teaches that God's saving acts, they're not abstract ideas. They leave traces that future generation can not only touch, they can ask about, they can interpret. So the outward signs are aids towards an inward memory. Okay, and God gives physical reminders because, as we know, the human heart is going to drift. And we need to have those reminders so that we can be cognizant of what God has done in our own lives and what God has done in the past. Okay, let's read verse 8 to 14 now. Joshua is going to set the memorial and the people are going to cross. And my question for you is, why does this memorial involve both leaders and the whole community? Verse 8. The Israelites did as Joshua commanded. They took up 12 stones out of the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, carried them over with them to the place where they camped, and laid them down there. Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Verse 10. The priests who bore the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The people crossed over in haste. As soon as all the people had finished crossing over, the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over to the front of the people. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the Israelites, as Moses had ordered them. About 40,000 armed for war crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for battle. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him. as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. Alright, biblical unlock number 2. Why does Joshua get involved in the memorial, and why is the people's crossing stressed again? I must say this again. It is because leadership must interpret deliverance and not just benefit from it. And Joshua ensures the memorial is set up in the right place. And we see the repeated emphasis on the crossing, and what that shows is this is a whole communal event. It's not something private. Memory belongs to the community, right? And leaders must help people remember God's works clearly. And teaching is how these memories, these miracles stay alive and are not easily forgotten. And that's what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, right? How is it that we can forget what God has done in our own lives? And it's because we treat spiritual matters as a sort of private thing to hold to ourselves, and we'll forget in that way. But if we constantly remind ourselves, constantly come back to the foundation or the community's source of ethics and reason, then all of a sudden we'll have something common that we can share. Okay, let's read verses 15 to 18 now. Focus here is going to be the waters return after the priests leave, and why does the miracle stop when obedience is complete? Verse 15. The Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant to come up out of the Jordan." Joshua therefore commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." When the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet touched dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before. Okay, biblical number 3. Why does the Jordan close only after the priests come out? It is because, again, the miracle that we're seeing here is tied to obedient order. God is the one making the way, and when the appointed action is finished, the water returns. This keeps the people from treating miracles like some sort of magical display, like what we saw in Egypt with the priests of Pharaoh, right, and the Egyptian priests and the Egyptian sorcerers. They would treat miracles like some sort of magical display, but the point is not some sort of spectacle that you are meant to be in awe of. Whilst people can be in awe of it, that's not the point. The point is that we trust and are obedient under God's command, right? So divine action is often linked with a disciplined response. And in this case, faith is not control of God, but rather obedience to God. Okay, let's read verses 19 to 24. This is the final section of the chapter. Here we're going to see the memorial for future generations. And my question for you is, how does remembrance become a tool for teaching faith? Verse 19. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. Those 12 stones that they had taken out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal, saying to the Israelites, "When your children ask their parents in time to come, 'What do these stones mean?' then you shall let your children know, Israel crossed over the Jordan here on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we crossed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and so that you may fear the Lord your God forever." Okay, why is the whole thing framed around children asking questions later? You'll see it here, right? When your children ask their parents in time to come, "What do these stones mean?" That's in verse 21, right? So it's about letting your children know about what has happened. So why is it framed around the children? It's because remembrance is meant to become teaching. The memorial, these stones here, are designed to provoke curiosity. And notice, asking questions is not something which is frowned upon. It's something that is encouraged so that it becomes an opportunity to teach what God has done in the past. What do these stones mean, right? The answer is going to tell the next generation that God saved his people so everyone would know his hand mightily. And this is something which I feel is often a straw man of the Bible, that people will say that the Bible tells you to give up your rational faculties, of reason, of logic, of inference, and blindly trust without any form of evidence whatsoever. But that is quite simply not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that Spiritual formation in this case is passing mystery into wisdom using teaching, providing a response for those who come up to you, right? That is what it's about. We saw in Acts, we will see in Acts chapter 17, that Paul is going to have debates with philosophers and Jewish leaders. Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Okay, so Joshua chapter 4, what does it show? It shows that God does not only deliver, He teaches people how to remember deliverance. And we're going to see this fulfilled in Christ in a very subtle sense. The cross and the resurrection, they are the memorial signs of the new covenant, not the memorial stones of the past. The cross and the resurrection are the memorial signs of the new covenant because Christ needs to be remembered. The church needs to keep seeing what God has done through what Christ has done. And the memorial stones that we're seeing here points forward to a gospel pattern, that the salvation that Christ gave us is remembered because it is proclaimed, the cross of Christ and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. As we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26, what does Paul write? He writes, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until He comes." Right? Notice this. This is not just a nostalgic habit that we do. Every time we participate in eating the bread of Christ and drinking the cup of His blood, right? We are participating in that remembrance. We're brought right back to Calvary and we are remembering what Christ has done in our lives, and that's why we have to constantly keep coming back to it. Otherwise, it's very easy to forget, right? And we shouldn't turn this into a habit. This is a form of spiritual formation. Alright, so how can we apply what we learnt in our everyday lives? Obviously, I'm not here to tell you, you need to do this, otherwise you are a bad Christian. No, I'm just providing what have we read in the Bible and how can this help us in our everyday lives? And what can we see in this particular instance? God has done wonders in our lives. Sometimes it's quite easy to see. Sometimes it's very visible. And I feel most people have something where they can point to and say, you know what, I don't know how I managed to get through this, but God made it happen. And with this as well, how do we remember God's works in our lives? Obviously, we can write it down somewhere, but the greatest thing that Christ ever did for us was dying on the cross for our salvation and rising on the third day. And how do we participate in that? Well, Jesus Himself said, "Do this in memory of me. Remember my sacrifice that I made for you, the bread that was broken, the flesh that was pierced for you. Remember the blood that was shed for you, the blood of the new and eternal covenant that will be poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Remember this." And that's what we need to remember, constantly coming back, whether it be weekly, just making it a point, not of habit, but rather of remembrance, what God has done for us. Otherwise, we'll forget. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. We learnt that God commands memorials because, as we said on innumerable occasions, memory is required because miracles are easy to forget. The stones that we see, they turn deliverance into a teachable memory, that Joshua and the whole people participate in preserving the story, that remembrance is meant to awaken questions in the next generation, and that Christian remembrance works the same way. It proclaims God's saving work until Christ returns. Next time, we're going to move from the memorial stones that we just saw in Joshua chapter 4 to the priestly reset and the covenant renewal that we'll see in Joshua chapter 5. We're going to talk about circumcision, Passover, and the holiness of entering the land with God. You don't want to miss it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.